tackling philosophy and ancient advanced science, all in one episode. Welcome to Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. Ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, interdimensional philosophers, seekers of truth, comparative mythology enthusiasts, and last, but certainly not least, all of you that desperately cling to your confirmation bias. Whether your interest is Atlantis to Zeus, Cuneiform to quantum physics, we tackle it all from our quantumly entangled castle, tucked away in the ancient flood-battered Central Pangaean mountain range. We're the one-stop shop for mystery, history, and comparative mythology. We're a podcast dedicated to exploring the ancient, mysterious, and unknown with logic and reason, where we also theorize that geometric fourth dimension exists and is the spiritual. Only trigger warning for this episode is a logical conversation, so if applying the Socratic method on fringe topics is disturbing to you, you want to turn off the podcast now. All right, so for this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to have our Psych Fact first and foremost, and then we're going to talk about an ancient myth that I stumbled upon that I think is worth having a conversation over, and then from there we're going to hit some deeper questions. We're going to discuss the philosophy and some ancient science angle, because I didn't really see that there was a lot talked about on that on the interwebs. Maybe I missed some stuff. Then I'm going to talk about some research I've been doing, some interesting light discoveries. It's kind of more some inside baseball. I haven't fully flushed everything out, but it's still some interesting stuff I feel like I owe the listeners since we've taken a break for such a long time. And then some general housekeeping stuff and closeouts. So there's your episode overview, listeners. We will jump right into the Psych Fact with our future resident psychologist. What's up, wifey?
Hi. It's been a while since recording.
I know. I was like looking over to make sure, like mid-intro, to make sure I had my my mixer sliders right and everything, because I had a panic halfway through. I'm like, wait, am I muted doing this or not? But yeah.
So I tried to make mine connected to the topic we're going to be talking about, but there is something called the hypocrisy paradox. So research shows that people are often more focused on appearing moral than actually genuinely being moral. And when confronted with their own inconsistencies, they'll double down on their so-called moral righteousness.
We all like to think of ourselves as being the good guy. Like, even if you're like the bad guy, like think Nazi Germany, even in their minds, they're thinking of themselves as the good guy, like 9 times out of 10 or even more than that.
This is not us defending.
No. This is just subjective, like, rationality, because you don't like to think of yourself as being a bad person or, bad guy, bad
everyone
girl.
wants to be seen as a good person. Everyone wants to be well liked.
Yeah.
So
it's like that saying that you're the villain in someone else's story.
Yeah.
And it's like, whether you deserve to be or not, that's a whole other question. But,
right.
Even if you are like Mother Teresa, you are still the villain in someone else's story.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting dichotomy there to think about. Did you have more you wanted to add on that? Because we were talking a lot about a bunch of different angles before coming on the air here.
I mean, there's a lot of different nuance to morality. A lot affects it and impacts it, but there's, emotion versus reason. There's something called moral dumbfounding, something where disgust can actually amplify the moral judgment. It just depends on how, again, a lot of different things go into anything psychology related, but...
And this is almost more philosophy related as well with psychology. And I know there's listeners out there that might even disagree. Well, I know of at least one that would disagree with the idea of an objective morality in some capacity or another.
Right.
And that's perfectly fine. Again, we're welcome to all different views and perspectives here. It's all about seeking the truth. But you have to ask the question as well, is, morality objective or subjective? And then you have to wrestle with questions based off of that. And we need to have an episode on that soon. We need to get Isaiah on for that. But yeah, I guess unless you have anything else to add, we'll just transition into talking about a little bit of quick setting the scene to how I stumbled upon this myth. And then I'll jump into telling the myth itself and the context around it, and then we can explore it a bit.
I mean, it kind of reminds me too of like other experiments that have been done in the past too, like the, experiments that aren't so ethical today.
You thinking about that one like jail experiment?
The Stanford prison?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of that one. There's a couple of other ones. There was like a sleep experiment where they made everyone stay awake for a certain amount of time, and that did not go well. There's also one where they starved the participants to see what would happen. That didn't go so well either.
Jeez. Yeah, that's why we have restrictions on morality.
Now we do.
And like in general guidance for like experiments and everything is because of these kind of things here.
That's why we have so many ethical principles, not just in psychology, but in pretty much any, work setting. You have like a certain set of guidelines that you have to follow.
Right. The Stanford prison experiments, I'm a little familiar with that one. I'll just say what that is briefly for the listeners, and then we can keep going here.
Mm-hmm.
That was basically they took students and they assigned some at random guard roles and others prisoner roles, and they saw their whole psychology shift based off of the identity that they were given, and they began to fit those roles. And it goes to show the danger of the mental framework that you view yourself from, that if you view yourself as like, a helpless prisoner that you can't do anything, that will start to affect your actions. So basically, and then like the prison guards like became cruel to their fellow students because they were so immersed into the dynamic going on.
Mm-hmm.
So really interesting identity psychology that I could talk about that one for a long while, and how important it is to have a healthy perspective and identity for yourself. But we would be here for probably like 3 hours, and I want to talk about this really cool magical ring that I was reading about. So we're going to talk about the Ring of Gyges. This is from Plato's Republic. The Republic is a very long work where Plato, I'm listening to it on audiobooks. I'm only about 2 hours into it. But he references this myth, or like one of the other guys talking references this myth in relation to the conversation they're having about what is just. And by just, they more kind of mean morality and practice. And they're having this conversation about if you were to remove all constraints and all consequences of evil, people doing bad things, would people still choose to be good, or would they choose to be bad? Like if you flipped the consequences, if there was like people that were just were always seen as bad for their whole lives and there was no benefit to it, and people that were bad were always seen as just and got all the benefits of it, how would people behave? And that's like what this person that's responding to Socrates here is doing. And I say Socrates, this is, I believe, Plato himself, but he's assuming the role of Socrates because that was a method of writing. That's my understanding here. I could be mistaken on some of the historical nuance as to who officially it is here. But just so the listeners are aware, when I say Socrates versus Plato, that's who I'm referencing. Okay. Let's see here. So the Ring of Gyges is basically this myth they kind of mention in passing about Gyges. He's this one, he's a Lydian, and he's a shepherd. And there's this huge earthquake that happens, and it splits open a portion of the earth, and he goes in and he explores the cave caused by this earthquake. And he finds this being in there that is described as, quote, from this version, more than human, and has on nothing but a gold ring. And so he takes the gold ring, puts it on his finger, and he leaves the cave. And then they have to do like a report, a gathering, these shepherds that are in this kingdom. And so he goes to this gathering, and he has this ring on, and I guess the meeting gets kind of boring or whatever. And so he kind of starts fiddling with it, and it has like this one little like switch or like thing that flips on the ring, and he flips it, and he goes invisible, and he sees people talking about him as if he's not there. And he's like, what's going on here? And so he flips it back, and he's there, and he's talking, and he flips it again. He's invisible, and he's like, this is so wild. So then he elects himself to be a messenger to go deliver the report to the king. And then he goes and delivers it to the court, and he actually uses this ring to seduce the queen and then overthrow the king and then become the ruler instead of the king. So he uses it for very nefarious gains. And it's a very interesting tool for the philosophical discussion that is being had here by these philosophers, these individuals, to discuss being able to get away with evil without consequences, without actually being seen as evil. And so that's the context for what's going on here. And, when I was looking, just briefly online to see, if anyone had talked about it from the angle I wanted to talk about this from, it was almost exclusively, everything I could find was about the philosophical angle, which is interesting, and we can talk about that some. But I'm more interested in the scientific myth angle here, because this is a myth that I've not seen anywhere else, but it's being treated in here not like, just making up some random story, just some random magical object just for the fun of it. It seems like they're actually calling upon a well-known myth. And they use the phraseology here. Let me see if I can find it real quick. As it is said to have been possessed by Gyges. So they're talking about it as if, okay, we don't necessarily believe this, but this is a myth that people know about in our time, that all of the people having this conversation are aware of.
Like it's almost common knowledge.
Right, like if I were to reference like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or Cinderella or something like that, like, we wouldn't necessarily automatically assume that it's true or talk about it like it's true, and that's a whole nother discussion as to how much truth is in those tales. But they're referencing it like it's at the very least this well-known myth. And Musings on Mysteries and Mythical Matrix were all about talking about these myths. And so I came across this, and I'm like, it's been too long since we've done an episode. I'm working on prepping other stuff, but I'm listening to this on the fly. Well, let's talk about this and have an episode. So I want to take this from the scientific angle, I guess, first, and then we can talk a little bit about the philosophical angles to it. But scientifically, like, let's play around with this for a second. This is a ring. Whether you believe this myth or not, there's multiple angles here, so don't think I'm a kook for the rabbit hole I'm about to go down if you're a new listener. But this is a ring that has a switch that you can flip to go invisible. And I was thinking about that, and I'm like, okay, I mean, of course, I read it like, any other myth on a surface level, like, okay, this is probably just a myth, that's how everyone would see this. But I'm like, what if it's not, like, what if there's something that we're missing here? And then I was thinking about it, and, listening to the Republic, it's a mind bender to wrap your mind around if you're not used to listening to those type of philosophical discussions. But I started thinking about it in terms of like how I could address the idea of this potentially being scientific. And I had this really great analogy here. So I'm going to ask you this question, babe.
Okay.
And just to get your on, because you don't know this question's coming, but I'm going to get your on-the-air reaction
it's not in the
to
notes,
it.
Is it?
No.
You did this on purpose.
Yes, I did. I like to get your reactions on the fly. But this is also for you as a listener to think about.
Hit me with it.
So suspended disbelief here. So like, we're going to acknowledge that there's certain limitations to the analogy I'm about to present, but we're going to ignore those. Let's say you have the Ring of Gyges in your hand, and let's say it works exactly as the myth being cited here claims, that it has a switch that will literally physically turn you invisible, that if I had it on right now and I flip the little switch, I'm gone. You can't see me. And then I flip it and I'm back. Let's say it works exactly as intended. And then I also have my cell phone in front of me, and I'll literally put it in my hand here because even though you as a listener have no clue, I like to be literal with this. So I have these two objects in my hand. Mm-hmm. Now let's say that there's no limitations to cell towers and my cell phone will still work for what I'm about to do, but I go back to 1800s and I have my cell phone. It still perfectly works, has perfect charge, has full bars. I can access all information from 2025, and I have the Ring of Gyges in my hand. Now let's say I hand both of these items to an individual from the 1800s. And I say, here Here's a ring that you can flip a switch that'll turn you invisible. Here is my cell phone that you can use to access all human knowledge from the year 2025. You just type in the words and it pops up. There's a screen that you're looking at that's like a magic mirror that you can, swipe up, and you can do all of these things. You can swipe around, open apps. You can hear music from this. It'll play music for you. You can watch things happen on it, either live or pre-recorded. You can make calls to people anywhere in the world in 2025. You have both of these items. Which one do you think the person is going to think is more realistic and less realistic?
Oh, man. 1800s?
Yeah, this is an 1800s person. They have the Ring of Gyges in their left hand.
I'd say ring.
You think the ring. Why?
They've seen a ring before. They haven't seen a phone before.
Well, right, but not just the ring.
Like a cell phone. They
Right.
haven't seen a cell phone before, but they've seen a ring before. But both sound... The ring sounds more realistic, but the abilities of both sound unrealistic to them.
Right. So, I mean, I'll grant you that. So the concept of the ring is easier to grasp, but okay, this is a ring.
Because they've seen a ring before.
Right. But like a cell phone, I have no clue even how to understand or quantify this kind of thing as a person from the 1800s.
Right.
So yeah, you're right. I was thinking about this, and I invite you as the listener to also engage in this thought experiment here. But I was thinking about this, and I'm like, the cell phone is far more out of reach to comprehend and understand than a ring that you can put on and just flip a switch and you turn invisible, versus all of the functions that we have on a cell phone.
Well, I mean, I don't think they would think that being invisible is possible either. That's the thing.
Right. They would think both are equally impossible.
Yeah.
Maybe one slightly greater than the other, but that's the thing. And that's the point I'm trying to get at here. Is it's like if we were to show the technology we have right now, even just you listening to this podcast, you listener, whoever you are, like listening to this episode either on YouTube or whatever your podcast platform of choice is. You like that is unfathomable to someone like 200 years ago, listening to something like pre-recorded and talked about over in another electronic device. There's no way to conceptualize that.
Well, I mean, think about, AI now and people in like the 80s, 90s, stuff like that. Until very recently, it wasn't really a thing.
Yeah, everyone thought about it in terms of Skynet and Terminator.
Yeah. Doomsday.
Yeah, that kind of thing. But that's my point here is I wanted to talk about this myth in context and in light of this idea that we kind of take really advanced technology for granted.
Right.
And it's like the Arthur C. Clarke quote, that the magic is just science we don't understand yet. So they reference this magical ring that can turn someone invisible. And it's like, how do we know that's not just a form of science that we haven't caught up to? Maybe that's even a simpler form of technology in its own right, just a different form of technology than a cell phone is. And so I'm not saying this is absolute by any means, but I like to play with these myths and not take the standard model approach and say, what if there is something more? What if there is either a complete truth or a partial truth here? And we'll talk about some other interpretations in a moment. Stay tuned. And we've returned here. Glad you haven't drifted off into the quantum unknown here on Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. So we were just talking about the Ring of Gyges here from Plato's Republic. And if you were to take that and a cell phone back to the 1800s, what would a person think is more realistic and less realistic? Email us at m.cloud.musings@gmail.com. Your thoughts. Curious to hear your opinion, or you can just drop a comment on YouTube. But, of course, there's more than one way to look at this myth. I'm not going to claim with absolute certainty that is the only way to read this is pure 100% literal fact. Right. But I also I don't agree with the standard model in that we should throw that out as, oh, a ring that turns you invisible? That's ridiculous. Let's get rid of that. I think we should acknowledge it as a possibility that maybe the ancients had a form of technology we don't understand, but then also consider other angles. I mean, this ring of invisibility could just be an embellishment or an exaggeration to emphasize other traits, such as charisma or manipulation. Someone that can make their actions go unseen, someone that had really good hearing, it could read body language really well. There's a lot of different ways that we could quantify a invisible ring kind of getting stuffed into like evolving into through myth, like the fish story. If your fish gets bigger every time you tell it. Instead of the person just having charisma, good hearing, good body language, ability to read body language, it eventually becomes, oh, he's just invisible because he's able to see and hear things without actually being there. It's like, so there is more than one way to read this myth.
That's a good point.
Yeah, there is more than one way to read this myth, so I don't want to claim this is absolute. There's more than one way to read most of these myths. I tend to lean more towards the ancient technology side. Cooler, but I also think that we kind of just dismiss the ancients as always just not being very intelligent, and they clearly were. So this myth came about for a reason, whether it was embellishment or whether it was pure history. We're not going to know unless someone finds the Ring of Gyges and it turns you invisible, or we develop a ring that turns you invisible. And then it's like, could you imagine like if instead of a ring, it was a cell phone in the story? You know, a mirror that people could hold in their hands that would light up when they looked at it, and they could access all forms of knowledge and make calls across the world and communicate with people almost telepathically. It's like you could very easily take these concepts that we have now and express them in terms of ancient stuff, and it would sound like black magic if you didn't have our technological understanding. So, and of course, the whole thing could just be a made-up story too, like 100% made up. Like there is the vague. I don't lean this way because the way that Plato goes about writing this in the dialogue itself here, they reference what seems to be a well-known story. According to the tradition, Gyges was a shepherd in the service of the king of Lydia. They emphasize in this version of translation I'm reading here, according to the tradition, Gyges was a shepherd, and then where he was a shepherd and who like the king or at least region was that the king was ruling in.
I would agree with that.
So, I mean, yes, there are people that look at this and say, oh, it's just an allegory for a philosophical point. It's like, I don't think so. It's like, just because I don't think we have this myth anywhere else. So we don't really have a way to verify that. To my knowledge, anyway. If you as a listener know differently, let me know. But I couldn't find this myth existing anywhere else in brief research. So this is all we have to go on, and people kind of lean towards Plato using allegories, which he does later in the Republic with the cave allegory. Those who know philosophy kind of know what I'm talking about there. He talks about like shadows on the wall and then coming out from like the cave and only seeing shadows to seeing the real world and how different things are. So there is, you can look at it that way. I don't agree with that. I think that's the very improbable explanation here.
Do you know what the surrounding context is of him referencing that in the text?
Yeah,
connecting it to something else?
Yes, like I said at the beginning with building up into this discussion of morality and specifically justice, but morality in practice is how I would define it. Where would people choose to be just if you flipped the roles and justice was treated as injustice and injustice was treated as justice? If the consequences were flipped, but the actions were the same. And that goes into your Psych Fact as to many people would choose probably not. But then, again, this gets really philosophical, and I don't want to go down this hole too much or we'll be here all night. But then this becomes like the question is, if there is no ultimate consequence for evil and wrongdoing, is it even objective at that point?
No.
And can you even say it's wrong if there's no consequence for it at the end? Because you have to have a higher law to enforce it. And if there's no consequences for it, there's no enforcement for it. So it all just becomes subjective preference. And so this is a huge thing to unpack. We're not all going to talk about this a ton on the air, but if you have any initial thoughts, go for it.
I'm just going to say, from my perspective, if there's no consequences or reward system, then it doesn't exist at all.
Right, because with psychology,
Yeah.
Pavlov's conditioning, there are different ways that you have to condition people: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, punishment, like addition of positive stimuli. So like you do
Yeah.
something good, you get. I'm explaining it in layman's terms
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
You do something good, you get a piece of candy, or you put your hands on your armpits and your hands are cold, so the feeling of cold goes away. That's negative reinforcement. And then you have like punishment aspects. There's different ways to that where you have the addition of something painful or the removal of something good. But it's like if you have all of these different dynamics at play, but it's like you flip the definitions, it's like it kind of stops to be what it is. It seems like order almost collapses in a sense.
Right.
To the way we would understand it. I'm sure I'll get some disagreements from people from different worldviews, which I welcome it. Send me an email, m.quad.musings. We'll talk about some philosophy. I'm down for that.
A good example of this in like cinema is The Purge.
Yeah.
Where you have like I forget, like 24, not
It was
24
like 24.
hours.
I think it was like 24.
I don't know. I haven't
seen it.
haven't seen this movie in like years, so I have no idea. But for a certain amount of time, everything is legal, like no consequences whatsoever. You could do whatever you want, no matter how big or small. This really reminds me of that movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like how far somebody will go if there is no consequences.
Yeah.
So
It's
kind of all I had.
It's an interesting question to play with, and I'm still working through the whole Republic. It's very dense to wrap my. I've had to like re-listen to sections a couple of times and try to like talk my thoughts out a little bit on it because it's very, very dense and very complex for someone that's not used to reading this type of philosophy, and I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
So I might be missing stuff slightly or misrepresenting certain philosophical aspects a little bit. But so my intent for reading this was because of Plato's discussion on Atlantis. It comes from one of his dialogues framed similar to the Republic. It's a discussion of the perfect state. And they go down this huge rabbit hole. And I've seen people like be like, oh, it's just an allegory, just like you see in the Republic with the cave. And I'm like I haven't read the whole Republic, but I know the allegory of the cave. I learned it in school. And I'm like, it's just a random cave that he uses to illustrate a point versus Atlantis. He goes to lengths to describe where this came from, that it came from the relative of one of the people he's talking to. And that person, his name is Solon, was in Egypt. And he heard this story from the Egyptians because the Egyptians preserved. It's like, why would you go like out of your way so much to explain where you got something from if it's just all made up in an allegory?
To add very specific details to something.
And the dialogue is incomplete too, the Critias and Timaeus dialogues. We don't have the full thing. It's pretty much leads up to like starting talking about the mythos of Atlantis, and then it just stops. Like you like turn the page like, oh, this is getting interesting. What's happening next? And nothing. So it's very frustrating in that regard. But I'm like, you know what? Like I haven't read through or listened through with audiobook like the whole Republic. I'm like, I owe it that, and to hear like Plato's style to see if my understanding of these analogies actually holds up under scrutiny. So that's why I've been kind of going through the Republic along with all my other research. Now it gives me something to do on the go that's relatively easy because big works like this are readily available for free on YouTube for audiobook purposes. But also, as I was thinking about this, I'm like, so we have a magic ring here that turns you invisible, and it's in the context of a discussion of total corruption and getting away with evil, and this ring has the ability to corrupt you to do evil. I'm like, this is the plot of Lord of the Rings here. This is what Tolkien drew from, because Tolkien is a huge myth fan. I'm like I said, he clearly was inspired by this and put his own spin on Plato's whole philosophical argument that's being discussed here, which I think is really cool. But I have, let's see. I have one last thought I want to add on this, then we'll take a break, and then we're going to talk about some of my research I've been kind of passively working on.
I do want to reference the one social experiment.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
It doesn't have to be right now. I'll let you say your thing, and then I'll...
No, go for it. That fits better now, and then we'll talk about the ring a little more, and then we'll shift over to my research.
A good social experiment to look up, it kind of connects to morality. It revealed a couple of other things too, but I'm not going to get into that specifically. But it is called Rhythm Zero, and it's by Marina Abramovich.
Sounds
I
Russian
think
or something.
she's Serbian.
Okay, yeah.
So I probably butchered it, but and this was 1974, so it was a while ago. But basically, she stood passively in Italy for 6 hours, like just in the streets, and let strangers and passerbys like do anything they wanted to her in the 6 hours with no consequences. So this is kind of like your question, like if we take away the consequences, what would happen? So she laid out 72 objects on tables in front of her and just let people do whatever they wanted. And some were like perfume and food and, pleasure aspects. And then some were more like pain, like knives. There was a gun with one bullet in it. So as the experiment kept going on, like the more time that had passed, people were getting more aggressive and violent. I'm not going to.
It's not PG. Everything.
I'm not gonna mention everything that happened. So Google it if you want to know. But I will just say that it got progressively worse for Marina as time went on.
And it's interesting because that shows something about human nature, is that our nature at its core, even though we don't like the idea of it, is corrupted. It has an evil aspect to it, if you can even put that to it, depending on the worldview you come from. And that seems to be kind of what is being wrestled with in the Republic, almost, in a sense, is it's this idea of humans want to be good and they want to be just. They want to be seen as just, but they want to do what's beneficial for them as well. And so they have no problem being unjust, unmoral to accomplish their ends. And so if you remove and flip the consequences, a lot of people will perform in different ways. And this echoes what we see in the Bible as well, about like having a sin and corrupted nature as human beings.
Yeah, but so basically it just showed that when you take away the consequences, people lose like personal accountability. And they feel, I guess, more emboldened, like to do whatever they want. And it also shows how easy it is to dehumanize someone when they're, being passive like that. But yeah, I'm not going to cover some of the other things that it revealed, but that's kind of my thing. It also bleeds into like the bystander effect and stuff like that. But yeah, definitely look up that experiment. Very interesting.
Yeah, email us questions if you want to explore any particular part of this. I have no problem doing a listener communications episode if we get enough listener communications to explore this further. It gives us an easier episode to create for y'all that are listening out there. But the last thing I wanted to hit on that I think was kind of interesting is, as I was like thinking about this, this whole story of the Ring of Gyges, and I'm like, a more than human being in a cave underground with a tool to turn themselves invisible. I'm like, this starts to kind of connect a little bit to the 411 patterns, because you have the caves, right? And there's a correlation to the missing 411 disappearances and the caves. And then in the end of one of Dave Paulides' videos, I think it's the 411 The Hunted, I'm not going to say too much about it here, go watch it for yourself, but there's an allusion to something that is unseen, that has an invisibility aspect to it almost, which I think is kind of interesting, but it also seems to connect here because you have an unhumanly being with technology that seems to fit and would explain a lot of bizarre things around the cryptid aspect that is in a cave system. It's like it all starts to kind of almost fit together a little bit, and I thought that was interesting. But stay tuned. We're going to talk about some Sumerian and Sumerian king list and some other stuff here once we come back from the break. a lot of mysteries out there to unravel and discover. And that's what we're all about here in Musings and Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. Don't worry, audience members. I owe you an explanation for why we have not produced an episode in a while. We will talk about that near the end here once we get to the housekeeping itself. But for now, let's talk about some research I've kind of been passively doing along with everything else. So I've made an interesting connection with the Sumerian king list, which is, for those of you that aren't familiar, if you're a new listener, it's a document written by the Sumerians initially, and I think there's later Akkadian scribes that copied it. I'm not sure the latest date we have for all of the copies, but there's a number of copies of this list, and it lists all these kings from before a flood washes over the earth, and then all these kings from after. It's a successive document. I've been staring at it as I'm learning Sumerian to try to wrap my mind around it a little bit more and to use it as a little bit of practice even. But I think I've made an important connection here, and I think I've discussed this a little bit, but I'm just going to recap everything and then build on the new stuff as well here. So there's this figure right before the flood happens on the Sumerian king list, and his name is Ubaratutu. And Ubaratutu, in another myth, the Epic of Ziusudra, is described as being related to the Noah figure. So Ziusudra, for those of you that are returning, you'll remember our discussion on the Eridu Genesis. That's Ziusudra right there. Ziusudra, Utnapishtim, Atrahasis, Noah, all names for generally the same figure. There's different versions of it all out there, but we're talking about the same person. It's someone that builds a boat and survives a global flood. But Ubaratutu connects to Ziusudra. It's often claimed that Ubaratutu is Ziusudra's father. I think this is a mistranslation, and I have the backing of scholars like Jeremy Black, who's a major figure in the compilation, translation, and understanding of Sumerian myths. I believe he was a key founder for the ETCSL, which is a huge corpus of Sumerian texts that you can go and access online. But there, like you see people, Matt LaCroix, who's connected with Billy Carson, cites Ubaratutu as Ziusudra's father. But some of the older myths don't necessarily quite agree with this angle. Jeremy Black actually identifies, let me back up. There's this other myth, it's called the Instructions of Shuruppak. And it's these instructions that Shuruppak is supposed to be giving to his son, Ziusudra, and Shurupak's father is Ubaratutu. So we have Ubaratutu, grandfather, listed in this myth, Shuruppak listed as the father, and then Ziusudra, Noah, as the son here. And this myth phrases it a little bit differently, but it's interesting because not all of the myths describe Shuruppak as a person. Shuruppak is also a city. It's the city that Ubaratutu rules in the Sumerian king list. So it gets a little bit confusing here, but there's a nice handy thing in Sumerian that's called a determinative. It's a cuneiform sign that goes to mark a place, to mark a city. So it's the ki symbol, Ki. You see this like in Enki's name from Sumerian. But there are determinatives that are present in later versions of the Instructions of Shuruppak, marking Shuruppak as a city. And I happened upon this on accident as I was kind of looking through stuff. And I'm like, whoa, wait, I thought this was a person, not a place. And so I dug into it, and I went and dug into an article talking about the Abu Salabik version of the Instructions of Shuruppak, which is, I'm unsure as if it's the oldest or one of the oldest versions we have. It might be tied with the second one, but it has in there a line. Let me see. I actually have it up here. It has in there a line on line 6 where it lists Shuruppak without the determinative and talks about Shuruppak being a son. And so I'm looking at that and I'm like, okay, so this makes sense then as to why Jeremy Black is referencing Shuruppak as being Ziusudra's father, is because he's going off of the oldest or one of the oldest attested documents, and that's his conclusion as a professional scholar, because he has a preface where he discusses this in the Instructions of Shuruppak. But yeah, so that's kind of where I've sat on it, is I'm like, okay, so if we were to put this to the biblical tree here, 1-to-1, this means then, because I agree with Jeremy Black, this has been my hypothesis. And again, keep in mind as a listener, this is still research developing, so there might be things that change or I find out are slightly incorrect as we go on. But if we compare this to the biblical timeline, you have Methuselah, who's the oldest person to live. That would be Ubaratutu, because Methuselah is Noah's grandfather. Ubaratutu, that would be Ziazudra's grandfather then. And then we would have Shuruppak is Lamech, who is Noah's father. And what's interesting is that Methuselah in the Old Testament actually outlives his son Lamech. Methuselah's death is what spurs on the flood, and we actually went to see Sight and Sound, and that was like a key aspect, is once Methuselah died, the flood was very quick to follow.
Right.
And this is something that the Bible teaches as well. So it kind of like, I was looking at that, I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense then, because Ubaratutu is the last king to rule right before the flood, and then the flood washes over according to the Sumerian king list. If this is Methuselah, Methuselah dies, and then the flood happens. And Lamech, Methuselah's son, the supposed Shuruppak here, would also be dead at this point if they're the same person. So it makes sense that Shuruppak is not a ruler. Maybe, Methuselah named the city after his son, just as a way of commemorating him or something like that. I was looking at all that, and I'm like, okay, so this is my hypothesis here, like the ideas I'm formulating in my head as I'm trying to synergize these myths. And then I've been learning, for those of you that are new, I've been learning Sumerian about 8-ish months now, diving into manuals like John Hayes. I have Foxvog's manual, and I also have Azard's manual. But I'm working on memorizing a ton of different signs, and I was on a work trip and we were actually talking, and I had my Sumerian king list notes up and I was looking at it. While we were talking, I noticed something, that the signs for Ubaratutu actually seem to be saying something else and communicating an idea to me with my understanding of what I've been learning from Sumerian. So the sign Ubara is a mashup of two signs. It's a merger of two signs, and that can have a number of different meanings. I'm not sure all the attested ones that scholars might propose, but one possible reading for it is it's the Cascal sign, which is the road sign, the sign for journey, like road, like way to travel, surrounded by walls. So one way to read this or understand this is protected journey. And the tutu, because Sumerian signs are polyvariant, meaning you can read the same sign several different ways sometimes. But the tutu is actually the same sign for do. It's just reduplicated, so we have it twice. And I have it up here in one of my translations. Yes, I think this is actually Foxvog's definitions here. But do is described as to come, go, move about. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, I wonder if we've kind of vaguely misunderstood or mistranslated this in some capacity, because we have the ubara, which is a sign value for a phrase or a word. And then we have do, like to go, and reduplicated. So like to go with emphasis, or maybe even to go for a very long time. And I'm like, well, wait a second. If we take all of these concepts here and we mash them together, because this is a word, this communicates the idea of he who traveled a very long time protected on the journey of life, maybe. I'm like, this seems to fit this idea almost of talking about Methuselah. Like of someone, because Methuselah in the Bible is the oldest person to have lived. He lives like 969 years. So it's like these Sumerian signs actually are almost communicating, like they have the potential at least, because again, I'm not an expert Sumeriologist. I still have a lot of work to do to master this language in its entirety. But it's communicating this idea of someone going a very long time on a protected journey. And it's like, why couldn't this be a metaphor for the journey of life? Because we already know that Methuselah lived a very long time. That seems to match up here potentially. So when we're talking about Ubaratutu, we might be talking about Methuselah. And I was looking at that, and that was really cool, like kind of confirmation. It still needs some more research, some more tweaks to it, but I thought that was pretty cool. What do you think?
That was a lot.
I know, it's a lot. Some listeners are probably frustrated and like, I'm going to have to go back over that like 5 times. I'll give like a really quick...
It's a lot, but it kind of makes sense, yeah.
This is why I haven't done an episode in a while, is because I'm doing all sorts of dense research that gives me the ability to rattle all of this stuff off. So it's like I've not been just forgetting about MQuad. I've remembered, but a lot of the work needs to be done in like behind the scenes. It's building the foundation. But basically, I'll just recap that really quick, and then we'll take a break. We'll do housekeeping items, and we will close out the show. But basically, I've proposed this theory that Ubaratutu is the biblical Methuselah that we see listed, the grandfather of Noah. And this is backed up by translations from some scholars, such as Jeremy Black, understanding Shurpak as being Noah's father, Ziuzudra's father, so that would make him Lamech. And that seems to be confirmed by the Sumerian cuneiform signs that we actually see with Ubaratutu, with what is communicated by these signs, the conceptual idea beyond just the phraseology itself. So I think that probably wraps it up into a little bit better of a bow than that good 7-minute rant did that I went on.
A neat bow.
Yeah, so that gives you a bow. We're going to do some housekeeping items, discuss some other stuff that's been going on, and we will be right back. I hope you haven't drifted off into the unknown here at Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. So we'll talk a little bit about why I haven't done an episode in a while. And
a lot's been happening.
Yeah, there's been a lot. So I was on a work trip for like 2 weeks or slightly more. Yeah. So it was kind of hard. It was a very last minute thing too. So it kind of derailed a lot of my plans and structures and all of that. I was also working on a film project. This is not the only YouTube channel I have and manage. So I was working on a very, very dense film project, and I'll mention what it is here. It's a stop motion film that I did pretty much 98% of the work on. So that took like a month of my life that I was just constantly working on editing stuff and visually and all of that. If you're curious, it's an Army Men stop motion. Yes, I'm a nerd. I think the language rant that I went on kind of already qualified me as a nerd. But yes, I did an Army Men stop motion film. I will put the link to that in the show notes as well for those of you that are really interested to see it. It's another YouTube channel. I
may be biased, but it's pretty cool.
It was a lot of work. But I agree. As objective as I can be, I can't really be very objective as the creator. But I look back at some of my very early works, because I've been doing stop motion on and off for about a decade, and some of my early works were pretty rough. But this one was very crisp, and it at certain points it seemed to fit like what you would see, on a Plastic Army Men scale, of course, like what you would see in like higher end action movies. So take that as you will if you're interested. I will put the link in the show notes. I'll tag the channel as well. So, but yeah, that was my first YouTube channel in high school. I made a ton of stop motion videos. So yeah, so I was working on that. That took a good chunk of time, a lot longer than I was expecting it to, and that kind of derailed a lot of episode prep. And then as well, of course, there's just research. So the next episode that I want to do is the Bale cycle, but it's very dense, and I want to put in a ton of research into understanding countering perspectives like Mark Smith's work, and he is a very dense read. He's not an easy, he's very, very academic. He's not easy to digest at all. So I'm trying to get caught up on reading multiple different perspectives from Mark Smith, and then taking the Bale cycle, which is actually a very fragmented myth that we don't have all of the components to, and scholars aren't even sure on the order that it comes in. So I'm trying to take this myth and figure out the best way to conceptualize it from myself, synergize it, and then tell it to you as the audience. And I have yet to wrap my mind around the best way to do that. So it's not like, oh, it's just this super straightforward retelling like we've done with all these Sumerian myths. It's like, no, there's probably about like 5 times more worth of work easily that has to go into just the Baal cycle. So that is coming at some point. I will try to work on that and hopefully have something before Thanksgiving or Christmas, but at this rate, I have no clue. Enoch episodes will probably be coming up soon as well. And these dialogues that we're exploring with Plato, this is all building up to an Atlantis conversation eventually. I'll step back a little bit. A lot of research that I've been doing behind the scenes has actually been language research. I'm not even sure how many it is at this point, but I've developed an addiction.
7.
Probably. I need to go to, I don't mean this to be offensive to anybody, but I need to go to the Polyglots Anonymous, which is Polyglots like multilingual person. It's like I've gotten addicted to learning and studying ancient languages. I'm currently working on either mostly learning, enhancing Hebrew, German, Greek, Sumerian, Akkadian, Classic Mayan, Quiche, which is a modern Mayan dialect, and that's 7. I think that's it. Yeah. So my intent here is
pretty good.
I'm looking at like the direction of MQuad, and I really have developed a passion for exploring these ancient myths. And honestly, I thought Sumerian stuff would just go by so fast and be a breeze, and there'd maybe be like 2 myths to talk about. But it's like the more I've dug into it, the more there is to uncover. And there's so many things I would have missed if I hadn't taken the time to at least learn the language over the last like 7-8 months. So I look at all of that and I'm like, I don't want to keep going and dive into all of these myths and never talk about the linguistic aspect. Like, of course, I can't go learn every single language, but I want to be able to understand enough of these like languages for a lot of the things that we're going to talk about to actually go and reference things in the original text and understand what's going on and be able to expound upon any potential hidden meanings that are present there. So that's pushed me down a huge rabbit hole. Sumerian, I've actually kind of fallen in love with the language. I'm still not there. I'm making a lot of headway. I just the other day had a huge breakthrough in understanding Sumerian verbal chains, which are like key components to the sentence. So Sumerian is subject, object, verb. So the verb comes at the end of their sentences. And there's like all sorts of stuff in the verb where they'll put all these prefixes and suffixes on that cross-reference things mentioned in the sentence. But it's not always one-to-one. It's not like they put the exact thing, like that's like the name of someone in the sentence or the specific tense or aspect or like the specific suffix from a noun. So, but I had a huge breakthrough and I was like reading through stuff and I kind of like something just clicked and I'm like, oh, I get it. This is what this chart is. It's part of that. So I'm getting there. And it's cool to kind of like look at like 8 months ago, I knew nothing about Sumerian hardly. And now I'm to the point where I'm like, I still can't read like a full sentence super well, depending on the sentence, but I can at least pick out parts of sentences and what these things mean with accuracy and predict it. And then look at what the translation is and be like, yep, that fits. So I'm getting there. And then I'm working on doing that with all the other languages as well. Classic Mayan, because there's some inscriptions and stuff there that would be interesting to dive into. Quiche is because the Popol Vuh, the Mayan creation story, is written in Quiche, so I want to be able to cross-reference that. Greek, of course, because of all this stuff here. Hebrew, because it's cross-reference the Bible so much, and then Greek helps with that as well. German, I grew up in Germany, actually, and that definitely, I feel like, contributed the bilingual aspect there, contributed to my ability to pick these languages up and understand different functions like this. So I was never, like, expertly fluent. Like, I was decently fluent. I could get by, but I never got to the point where like I had the vocab to like talk about anything I wanted in German. So that's kind of more maintenance where I'm trying to build that vocab. And yeah, so that's kind of more what I've been doing than anything is just honing in on languages. And it's not a lot of like really super cool stuff all the time. Like a lot of it is just I have a flashcard app on my phone and I'll sit there while Maddie and I are watching a movie or a TV show or something. And I'm just going through Sumerian flashcards or Akkadian flashcards or something.
At least it's not that one app anymore where you hear that random chime.
Oh, I still have that one too. I just
I
don't
know,
do
but
that
you
much.
don't use it as much.
Yeah. I mean, I do it daily. It's just, it's drops, but it's...
I don't know what app it is,
It's
but
drops.
it's so annoying. the chime.
Yeah.
And I just know you're on it.
Yeah. I only do 5 minutes once a day on it. That's why you're not hearing it as much. But
Right.
I use that to kind of augment and rotate. But yeah, I've collected all sorts of ancient manuals, but that's kind of what I've been doing behind the scenes, is studying a ton of ancient languages, really broadening my knowledge. I'd like to maybe even go eventually get a degree in this, because I feel like it's great to be able to do all this. Like, you don't need a degree to learn these languages, but like a lot of people don't tend to take you as seriously unless you have a degree. So I already have a bachelor's, so this would be a master's I'd be looking to go for eventually, potentially. We'll see. But yeah, so this is kind of like, I haven't been doing as much publicly with MQuad, but a lot privately has kind of shifted as I've realized how passionate I am about all this and how much I want to keep exploring this. So that's kind of the too long, don't listen to everything else. That's pretty much the gist of it there, if you're kind of just skipping around, tuning in to the end. But anything else you want to add before we close out? Any final thoughts on everything that we've discussed?
If you do look up that social experiment, the Rhythm Zero, just I guess I'll put a warning like for content again, because it's not for kids to see, because there are some images of it and it's not for children. So be careful.
Yeah. No, that's good. Good warning. Don't want anyone stumbling upon anything.
And I guess like
unsightly.
I don't know if I should say that, but there's
Probably shouldn't if you're asking the question. We can talk about it after.
Well, it's a warning, but it's
I mean, just adult content. We'll leave it at that.
Adult, yes.
There's adult content there, so viewer listener discretion is advised. Proceed at your own risk. We're not liable in any way, shape, or form. Do as you will. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life, but I will give you the warning and be a decent human being as best as I can. Not because I feel like I have to, because that'd be bad consequences. Or do I?
Well, the only reason I thought of that, I was like, I probably should put a warning. I said it wasn't for kids, but a very specific, well, not very specific warning, but a more tailored warning.
There's a diverse set of things. So if you're a person that's triggered by
like it's adult content and there are pictures of the adult content there.
Yeah, but there's other stuff too. So it's like if you're a more, I don't want to word this offensively because I don't mean it offensively, but like if you're easily triggered by negative things in the world, that would be something you want to avoid. Yeah. And we'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Or just violence in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so buy us a cup of coffee. Link will be in the show notes. As always, it takes a lot of time to do research and uncover all of these mysteries. So yeah, anything you can do to help facilitate the show is always greatly appreciated, never required, of course. $25 donation or more will get you mentioned as a producer for the upcoming show. And at the very least, we ask that you consider sharing the podcast with someone. Just tell someone else about us so that we can build a bigger listener base. The more listeners we have, the more I can focus time into creating more episodes. So yeah, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube handle all m.quad.musings, Facebook Musings Mysteries Mythical Matrix. Always email us at m.quad.musings@gmail.com. We want to hear your confessions, concessions, contentions, your snide remarks, whatever you like about the show, whatever you dislike about the show. And yes, I don't have that in my notes. I still just have that memorized after months. Discord server link will also be in the show notes. There's a channel in there where I talk about these type of discoveries as I make them. I haven't been doing that with these ones as recently, but I'll try to get back into that a little bit more. Let everyone know that, like, yes, I'm still alive. So.
Yeah.
All
we're
right.
still here.
Yes, we're still here. we haven't wandered away. Just quantumly transcended time a little bit as I've been lost in the libraries of the quantum realm. So whether you've been listening on the earth with the mortals, in the stars of heaven with Enoch and the cherubim, or
down in Sheol,
we thank you for quantumly transcending time to join us for this epic mythology and philosophical conversation. We hope you have a good rest of your night as I go off to study more ancient languages and texts.
Bye.